Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 14th, 2020. Oh, I did that again. 2020, 2020. I'm never going to get this right. It doesn't matter, but it's going to become an obsession. I can see that. All right, time to round things up from last night. Important news. Things happened at a football contest of some sort yesterday. I don't know what happened in the football contest. That I didn't see. But it's apparently important that I know. Fox News thinks it's important that I know that the president was greeted with huge cheers at what I guess was the college championship game. Did I see correctly? Was LSU and I missed the whole thing, including the entire football season. So I'm not really sure who it was, and it doesn't matter. Congratulations to the team that won it, if it wasn't the one that LSU Clemson. Okay. Congratulations to both of you just for being part of it. You both get trophies, participation trophies. That's good news. And yes, Fox and Friends apparently very happy that the president was greeted, as they say in their chyron here, by huge cheers, which at first I thought was huge ears. He does have huge ears, but it's huge cheers. Why would he be greeted by his own ears, though? That didn't make any sense. But, you know, Fox is kind of a weird channel, and I wasn't sure what they were talking about. So he was greeted by huge cheers, and he's very happy about that. Other people were circulating video of him. I had the sound off. It looked like maybe they were down there for the national anthem or something on the field. And Donald Trump is holding Melania's hand, and she gives him the shake off again. And then Trump, with his hands now free, and he's got nothing to do with his, I guess, what was it, his right hand, he then busies himself adjusting the giant muumuu that he wears with the long ties, fixing his suit, adjusting the lapels as though it was going to hang on him any better, one way or the other. And I don't know. I'm not sure what was going on. I don't know. Maybe she should. I thought perhaps. I had the sound off. And it looked like in the background there were a couple people there who had their right hands over their hearts. So I thought it might be the national anthem. And I thought maybe she was shaking his hand loose to remind him, you shouldn't be holding my hand. You should be saluting or putting your hand over your heart. But she didn't do it by way of example for him. That's usually that. I've seen other videos where that prompts him to remember that he's supposed to be doing that. I don't know what was going on. Doesn't matter. The other thing is, I guess the big news is that you're all triggered. You're all supposed to be crying now because Vince Vaughn was at the game and sitting in the same box or whatever. They have boxes. He was seated near the president and Mrs. Trump, and he chatted with them briefly, according to the video, shook their hands, and left. And I don't know what was supposed to happen. I think what ended up happening was somebody circulated the video on Twitter yesterday, and I guess rather sarcastically added a line to it saying, I'm sorry to have to share this video with you, all of it. I'm sorry for every part of it. I guess we were supposed to be dismayed in some fashion by the fact that Vince Vaughn was being polite to the president. He may even like the president. I don't know. But then I did see, who was talking about this? Was Parker Malloy, perhaps, saying, yeah, I don't know exactly what it is, but conservative Twitter is now dedicated to the proposition that liberals everywhere are crying because something. Vince Vaughn, I guess, was their favorite actor, and now he was polite to and or actually likes Donald Trump, and everybody has to stop paying millions of dollars for Vince Vaughn movies, I guess, if that was what was happening. But I don't know. So there you have it. Are you sad? Are you upset? Oh, yeah, you're supposed to be triggered and owned. And so I hope that all of you are up to speed on that and have cried or torn your hair out as might be appropriate. I don't know. I think also people were saying, yes, he's a well-known conservative, is Vince Vaughn. And okay, that might be true. And so my life has changed in so many ways. I did see our show's good friend Darwin Darko pointing out that something relevant for us in the video, as long as I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about it, was that the president still does that, as he says, pseudo power move with Vaughn, shaking his hand. He grabs it from sort of like snatches it from underneath and turns his wrist and then crushes his hand in there, and then pats his hand, the backside of Vaughn's right hand with his left hand. And, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the dynamic is supposed to be. And, but handshakes are still an issue for him, I guess. And he's never, I guess he's been triggered and owned and never got over having, who was it who was prepared for that? Was it Emmanuel Macron who had been briefed ahead of time? Well, anyway, that's where we are. We're nearly at war. The president's being impeached. He's lying about everything. The courts are being stacked with lunatics. The Department of Justice has been thoroughly politicized. But something, an actor guy shook the hand of the president, and that's really what we should be focusing on. Okay. So just bringing you up to speed on what's actually going on in the world so we can move on to the rest of our topics for the day. Daily Kos Radio, as you may have guessed from the past 7.5 minutes of discussion, is live now. Bill knew it even before we started. Tonight is debate night in Des Moines. Thank you, Bill, for reminding me of that, because I hate that stuff and I don't watch it. And Kagro X, though, me, David Waldman, is ready to spend 2 hours gushing over all his favorite corn-based recipes, especially corn whiskey. Yum. I have tried corn whiskey. I don't know that it's a yum, but it's a drink. We do have that. Do they even make corn whiskey and make corn everything, I assume, in Iowa? Yeah, we're once again letting Iowa go first, and now we're going to have a debate, and I'm done with the primaries. I don't know who I'm voting for, but that'll all be, quite honestly, all my choices will probably be gone by the time my primary rolls around, although Virginia is voting earlier than it has recently, I think. I might actually have to make a selection. But, yes, I've lost my interest. I lost my interest early on in all this. I don't like the early rancor over the primaries. I like lots of people, and for lots of reasons. And I'm a very forgiving person when it comes to stupid stuff, although not that I don't like to dig in on stupid stuff and twist the knife, certainly, if I really hate you. But in the primaries, no, not my thing. And chiefly my occupation in the primaries is finding ways to either signal something about behavior I don't like, but then ultimately saying, this is just the way the primaries are. And people don't need lessons from me about how to behave on Twitter or social media or anywhere else. And it's not going to change anything anyway. But yeah, I've always come to the realization that there's no way for me to let people know how I feel about the behavior of others during the primary season, and nobody cares. So forget it, and then I just tune out the rest of the primary as well, and I wait for people to drop out. The new trend is to drop out before Iowa, and that's not just this year. It's sort of the last couple of elections we've watched the same thing happen. So yesterday's loss from the field was Cory Booker. And I don't know, did it happen after the show or did it happen possibly during the show? But I was too busy talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's leadership pack, which, as Scott put it in the summary, long story short, it's okay. But if you want the long story long, there's a full hour from it yesterday about exactly why it's okay. So if it's important to you to know every reason why it's okay, you can, and you missed yesterday's show, I recommend that you put your life on rewind and go back and check it out. Okay, where are we today? Yes, it's Tuesday today, and we were thinking of moving Joan McCarter's usual Wednesday call over to Tuesdays for reasons. There were some. I'm not exactly sure what they were, but she's got a busy schedule. And Wednesday was a day that was rapidly filling up with other potential entanglements. So she had requested possibly moving it over to Tuesday, but that I should remind her, especially the first time, that we were going to do it Tuesday instead of Wednesday. So I did, but I don't know if it worked. I did say I do have a message now that Joan has seen my reminder, and it might not be a long opportunity to jump in because, once again, we've got lots going on and plenty to work on the front page. And it's quite honestly, it's a miracle we get her away from the front page first thing in the morning on any day. So we'll give it a shot and try it out perhaps later on. Not a very long segment, but there's only a few things of interest going on. Like I said, wars, impeachments of presidents, manipulation of the entirety of the executive branch, the Department of Justice in particular. Small things. I did see in scrolling back today, I guess I should mark out these stupid videos so that I can share them with you. I don't know if there's any call usually in our summaries for, he mentioned something that he saw this morning that was very stupid and irrelevant to everything in the world, but I would like to see that tweet. I will prepare to share those with you. I think somewhat more relevant to the rest of the world here, I saw a retweet from Lawrence Tribe again this morning, pointing out a story about Bill Barr and the Justice Department. I guess the story is asking the Supreme Court to delay hearing the latest Affordable Care Act case until it doesn't matter anymore. That is, until after the election, to set things aside so that Trump doesn't have to run on the record of eliminating protections for pre-existing conditions. That was, I guess, the big story of yesterday in terms of Trump's mental illness, was that he spent the day insisting that he was the person who has protected people with pre-existing conditions, and he fought to keep that protection in, and he's the only one who can save you, and everybody else is trying to take it away from you, which is, of course, exactly the opposite of the truth. They're in court right now seeking to destroy protections for pre-existing conditions, and I guess the threat is they're now far along enough in the case that the Supreme Court could take things up, and I guess it would bounce back to the Roberts Court, which is now somewhat differently composed, but which it is believed saved the day, in a manner of speaking, by having the Chief Justice realize people might murder all of the justices if we rule against the Affordable Care Act and take away their health care coverage. And I don't know whether Barr speculates that that's exactly what he would do again, or whether the speculation is that he no longer has the votes on the court to save the Affordable Care Act, with dedicated lunatic conservatives like Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch now on the court. And the political repercussions would now go beyond the murder of the entire Supreme Court, and people will tear us all limb from limb when they find out what we've done. Let's make sure that it doesn't happen until after the election, when we will be able to renew our Secret Service protection and prevent people from tearing us limb from limb when we take away their health care. It's a plan. I mean, they have to worry about such things. Tribe is pointing out here, let's see. It says, this is the most blatantly political manipulation ever, and it's certainly among the most. SCOTUS should say no to Barr and insist on hearing this preposterous challenge to the entire Affordable Care Act now. Delaying it until after the 2020 election would be a disgrace solely designed to protect Trump. And it would be hard to argue with that. The inclusion here is a link from the new civil rights movement.com. Not a URL I'm terribly familiar with. I see what they're trying to do here. My reading is, my sharing their article is is purely a nod to Tribe. I can't vouch for the place or whether or not I would myself agree to equate their work with the old civil rights movement, but maybe. Anyway, this piece is titled, Trump's DOJ Asks SCOTUS to Delay Until After Election, a case that would void Obamacare and steal health care from millions, by David Badash, B-A-D-A-S-H. That's badass with an H on the end, in case you're looking for a cool way of remembering your name, David. But I think you've probably got that down. Even while promising to protect popular aspects of the Affordable Care Act behind the scenes, or lying about it in front of the scenes, President Donald Trump and his administration have been hard at work trying to kill Obamacare. I think you know the stature of the case, the procedural posture. I think where we were was the trial court crazy judge went with whoever the plaintiff was there and essentially held that they ought to kill the whole damn thing. And then I think they brought it to the craziest crazies of maybe was it the Fifth Circuit that had it? And I don't think that they stood in the way of that either. And I guess the Supreme Court is the last stop on this. Let's see. The Department of Justice is supporting a lawsuit brought by Republican governors, there we are, and state attorneys general that has already received a ruling finding the individual mandate is unconstitutional. The DOJ then asked the court to declare the entire law, all of Obamacare, unconstitutional. And now that case is moving to the Supreme Court. But the Trump administration knows if it kills the now popular health care law that bears his predecessor's name, they will lose the support of millions whose lives literally depend on it. Or I guess if they lose their lives earlier, they will not lose. They'll lose the people, but not their support, and their votes won't go to the other side. So maybe that's part of the strategy. So, on Friday, I guess Friday last, the U.S. Department of Justice under Attorney General Bill Barr asked the Supreme Court to delay deciding if it will hear the case, so any subsequent ruling would be handed down after the November 2020 election. Bloomberg's Sahil Kapoor breaks the news with this tweet, which, well, you know what? The tweet basically says all of that. Word is just getting out. Several Democratic lawmakers saying likewise that they ought not to delay things. I think what struck me about the headline and the article beneath was that this is happening at the same time that the Trump administration has made what if I remember correctly, is their 23rd request for expedited hearing of some case before the Supreme Court. They're constantly asking for emergency acceleration. I was going to say expediting. It's not. Is it expedition? I guess maybe it could be. I don't even know how what form the word takes at that point. But anyway, apparently something that's ordinarily a rare ask has become a commonplace ask when like proper libertarians, the Trump administration needs something done fast. They make some sort of emergency declaration and then ask the court to comply. And then in other cases, they just say, we want this not to be decided until after the election. So they're very into trying to manipulate the timing of cases before the Supreme Court, which is always something people hope to be able to do. But I guess they've been trying to manipulate the timing more aggressively and more often than most previous administrations, or perhaps all previous administrations. And worthy of note among the many things worthy of note already in today's news. Let's see. Let's run down the list of things that we've set aside in Twitter and or Pocket and keep going until we get a chance to hear from Joan McCarter. This is not a call for you to rush in and disrupt your schedule or anything. I'm merely explaining what we're going to do. We've got plenty, but we would love to hear from you, Joan. All right, let's see. Yes, here's an interesting development as well. We have news. Is this the report I'm thinking of or no? Well, anyway, we have news in the last 24 hours or so. Yeah, I guess this covers it. This is a release from American Oversight, the what should we call them? The Democratic watchdog activist group that has rededicated itself, of course, to an anti-Trump stance. I say Democratic, but I guess most of the operatives are former Democratic operatives. But they are a officially nonpartisan, nonprofit ethics watchdog and frequent FOIA litigator. I think most of the people that I hear from sharing their material are, generally speaking, Democratic operatives or left-leaning folks. But let's see who's involved up at the top. Austin Evers, I don't hear from all that often. Melanie Sloan, senior advisor, she used to be with CREW, as I recall, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. But I guess they can still claim to be relatively nonpartisan. Anyway, okay, I won't fight with them about their designation. Instead, I should read their report, which was quite interesting. Let's see. What's this? I wish I knew exactly where this came from, because I think I saw a tweet that interested me in this report, and then the report, or the discussion of the report itself, clouds the one nugget that I thought I was going to bring forth with this. I should have gone with the tweet instead. Let's see. Joint Status Report, American Oversight versus Doe, Perry and, who's this? Brulette, I guess? Brouillette. Brulette's? Ukraine Records. Ukraine. See, now that's something we're interested in. Ukraine Records and Communications. Joint Status Report filed by American Oversight and the Department of Energy in American Oversight's lawsuit seeking the release of Secretary Rick Perry's communications with high-level Ukraine officials, with outside groups associated with U.S. energy interests in Ukraine, and with particular associates of President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani. American Oversight is also requesting records regarding the U.S. delegation led by Perry to Ukrainian President Zelensky's inauguration, including the records of former Chief of Staff Brian McCormick. The Department of Energy agreed to make the first production of records on January 28th, 2020, very soon. In fact, 2 weeks from today, prioritizing Perry's and McCormick's communications, as well as records related to the delegation. Subsequent productions are scheduled for February 4th and March 16th. Quite obviously, the import of this, of course, the beginning of the Trump impeachment trial, which, let's see, who sent me this note? Greg sent me the note that it looks like we have a likely start date, as he puts it here, to the Senate impeachment trial for Trump. Democrats likely to have one Republican who will vote with them. One Republican, and not even really all that likely, who will vote with them to call witnesses before the trial's end. John Cornyn, who is not that one Republican, says to reporters yesterday that he thinks the Senate trial will begin January 21st. That would be 1 week from today. And I guess what's most interesting is that 2 weeks from today, we'll have another flood of information that will likely color how the public views the increasing level of guilt evident among Trump and his cronies and even other cabinet officers now. Will it be too late? I guess, as I recall now, I think one of the tweets that interested me in this particular story was how strange it will be to start getting additional evidence of the president's guilt after the trial is over. And the trial may still be ongoing during the first release, the first tranche of the documents being released according to this order in the American Oversight case. But the bulk of the releases, I guess, since they'll be doing it in 3 tranches, won't come until likely after the trial has concluded. I think initial estimates of the length of the trial were somewhere in the neighborhood of perhaps 2 weeks. It could take the Senate 2 weeks to advance through this stuff, with about 1 week of it perhaps dedicated to the presentation of evidence. And I guess the way the trial rules are likely to be setting up, well, for one thing, there may be no witnesses. We're still looking at that as highly unlikely, given the Republican stance on these things. And two, the Republicans contend that they'll be adopting trial rules that will restrict what evidence can be brought into the record in the Senate trial to only to things that were previously revealed as part of the record during the House investigations. In other words, sort of attempting to adopt the stance of a appeals court to a analogy of the House as the trial court, except for the fact that, of course, the trial was not conducted in the House. It was conducted in the Senate. They have the sole power to try those impeachments. I don't know if those of you who didn't have the misfortune of going through law school, or maybe watch enough television courtroom dramas, know the exact difference and how trial courts and appeals courts handle things. But typically speaking, the initial trial being held in the trial court is where all the evidence is produced, and when things are reviewed on appeals, it's not a time to introduce new evidence. It's simply a review of the record produced by the trial court. Makes sense, but not in this context. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Just for your information, I have tracked down the provenance of the article here, so finally I can sort of explain and fill in the background here. Maybe we'll start with that. I guess it was NYC Southpaw noting yesterday that it's going to be pretty weird to have evidence coming out after the impeachment trial is over, which he said in reference to Natasha Bertrand of Politico tweeting out the note accompanying the link to the American Oversight release, which itself was not all that clearly written, quite honestly. But she says, here we go, the Department of Energy has agreed to release multiple categories of Ukraine-related records to American Oversight, which tweets under the handle of We Are Oversight, including former Secretary Rick Perry's communications with high-level Ukrainian officials. First production slated for January 28th. Then we find out about that schedule from American Oversight's release, which didn't really clear that much up. But yes, it will be weird with those bits of evidence coming out either in the middle of the trial, which is not as bad as after the trial, but the bulk of it coming out after the trial. If we had a Justice Department that, hadn't been thoroughly captured by the Trump crime family, we might say that such an opportunity was one with which we could move straight to shredding the Office of Legal Counsel's prior memos that purport to rule out the indictment of a sitting president. because, of course, the remedy of impeachment will have been removed, and evidence of the president's guilt engineered to emerge only after the charade of the impeachment trial is held on a partisan basis in the Senate. And like I said, if they had anything like a independent and fully functioning Department of Justice, you might find that it's time to finally shred that OLC memo. All the rationale originally given for avoiding the indictment of a sitting president being inapplicable to this particular president. That is, one, the distraction from attention to his duties, which of course is not an issue for Donald Trump because he never pays attention to his duties. Second, of course, the additional worry about the national security over and above all the rest of his duties. But that too is something that the president ignores or is actively working against America's national security when he is concentrating. So it might actually be better for the national security at this stage of the game to indict him. And third, that a remedy exists for a lawless president. It's not that we are saying the president is above the law. It is that you must first either wait for him to leave office voluntarily through in some fashion, or be term limited out, or ultimately, I guess if you simply can't get to either of those or can't wait, you could remove him from office, whereupon he would no longer be a sitting president and could be indicted. And so, though it's a blunt instrument, impeachment was available as a remedy, at least in theory, and so you needn't rely on the instrument of indictment in order to be rid of a lawless president. But since that last resort, too, has been removed from the table, perhaps it's time to simply recognize that this was merely an opinion, a supposition on the part of OLC attorneys, usually quite competent and sharp attorneys, some of our best, very often at that, but they were dealing with a very different situation and certainly a very different president, and it's proven to be problematic, and their suggested solutions are simply not realistic options at this point. And we can just say, you tried. Your opinion was relevant and disappointing, but somewhat helpful in terms of continuity of government and maintaining some level of predictability in the operations of the federal government. It's now, however, counter to those goals to continue to follow your advice, and we're simply going to have to, we could do away with it forever or add a Trump codicil, possibly. But it is time to treat the OLC memos as what they are, suggestions, and little more than that. We've given them a higher status by taking that suggestion and running with it for several decades, but the time of its usefulness has come to an end. I was also explaining to you about the difference between the trial courts and the appeals courts. I mean, you all obviously inherently know that there is some difference between the two of them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be two different kinds. But just to be perfectly clear about things, so the trial court is where facts are established based on the introduction and weighing of evidence by the jury, by the judge, by the two advocates working for either side, when it comes to the introduction of that evidence. And a record of fact is developed by the trial court when an appeal is launched. And by the way, you wouldn't know it necessarily from the way Trump or the Trump administration or Trump personally handles appeals, but you're not just entitled to appeal anything. It's not, the appeals courts aren't courts that exist for the purpose of entertaining the wishes of sore losers. You have to establish based on the record that there's some good reason to believe that the next level of courts up will have some chance of finding a mistake in the application of law. It's not where you would appeal to, say, for instance, bring new information to light, necessarily. There are ways to do this, but it's not a court that says, we want to rehear the evidence and see if we would come to a different conclusion. It's not a let's try again in a new court. It's a matter of, you would have to prove to them that as a matter of law, there was a mistake made in the way the trial was conducted that could reasonably stand a chance at reversing things if it had been done right. So if there were evidence that was known about but excluded by the trial judge, and you think that it was mistakenly excluded, you can appeal on that basis and ask that the case be sent back to the trial court and retried with this evidence permitted. Or you can ask that you can even ask that the appeals court simply overturn the ruling, because it would be so obvious there could be no other conclusion but that the case would have come out differently had the law about the admissibility of evidence been correctly applied. Or any number of mistakes. It's not just evidentiary mistakes. But it's not the case that you simply say, well, I lost, so I'm going to ask some different judges to look at things. You have to prove that that there was a mistake of law made, basically, at some earlier stage. And similarly, going to the Supreme Court has its own sort of protocols. You could be appealing the ruling of the appeals court that no mistake was made. You can still be doing that. But also they look for other things. They can't take every case. They are also looking for things like, is there a difference between circuits as to how certain types of cases have been handled, and should we establish a national standard so that everybody gets equal justice no matter where they are in the country, et cetera, et cetera. There's reasons why higher courts would either agree to take a case or reject taking a case. It's not simply a matter of, well, I lost, and so let's just do this thing over again. Anyway, so that explains that. What's weird about the way things are going in the impeachment context, which is a very different context, is most of us have been taught, anyway, to this point, that the analogy you should keep in mind with respect to how impeachment goes in the two houses is that the House acts as more of a grand jury, and a grand jury, by the way, doesn't always hear witnesses from both sides. There isn't an opportunity for the defense to present a case, and all of the things that Trump and his team complained about as being unfair, witch hunt, hoax, is set up, whatever terminology they were using, because they didn't get a chance to present their case. That's, of course, because in a grand jury you wouldn't have that opportunity. And that's because your life, liberty, or property are not at stake before a grand jury. The worst a grand jury can do with you is charge you with a crime, whereupon you will have the opportunity to present your case to a trial court before a petty jury, not a grand jury. And that's the big thing to keep in mind. It's they have sort of obscured things by appealing to your Americanism. Well, everybody knows that in front of a court and in front of a jury, you're allowed to present both sides, and the defense gets a chance to present its case and call witnesses and introduce evidence, because otherwise it's just a one-sided sham show trial, and you have no chance to defend yourself, and that's not the American way. Why isn't it the American way? Because we have the right to defend ourselves from being deprived by the government of our life, liberty, or property. Yes, all of that is true in front of a trial court, but when your life, liberty, and property are not directly at stake, then no. So that's the real, that's the analogy we've been taught all along. Republicans now say, no, all of that is completely wrong. The trial court isn't the Senate. The trial court is the House. This despite, of course, the fact that the Constitution says pretty clearly which the trial court is. It's the Senate. But now the claim is, well, they really did try me in the House, and they tried me incorrectly. If the House is considered the trial court, well then, yeah, the trial was conducted incorrectly, and you'd have a valid complaint. But since the Constitution says where the trial takes place, in the Senate, there's really no other analogy you could possibly make but that the Senate is the trial court. That leaves you guessing, perhaps, because it doesn't say exactly what the House is, but the only reasonable analogy to make there, because of the way the procedure works there, being pretty much similar to the way a grand jury works, but also that's when in the process grand jury happens, before the trial. Anyway, so what they've decided to do is, in order for the Senate to work like an appeals court, wherein an appeals court would be allowed to say, this is not the time to introduce evidence. We are going to review the record as it exists already. That's what an appeals court does. But in order to get it to the place that Republicans need it to be, for the Senate to be able to say, yeah, no new evidence. But they want to say no new evidence because they're Republicans and they don't want any evidence at all. They can't do anything about the evidence that's already been revealed, but they can prevent new evidence from being introduced by saying, we're the kind of court where no additional evidence gets produced. That makes us an appeals court. That makes the House a trial court. And if they're the trial court and they didn't introduce both sides, then they have done something wrong and unconstitutional. And the whole process is unconstitutional, just like Rudy Giuliani says, and we have to throw it all out, except that that's just not the way things work, ever, anywhere. But that doesn't matter. That's what the Republicans want us to come away with. So that's how you should understand that one, as Republicans having it completely wrong. That's not hard. You're used to that. You can do it. All right. Let's see. Other interesting bits and pieces of news worthy of discussion. How come this article doesn't appear to be, for some reason, in... there we are. I guess it gets around to it in Pocket here. But in the Twitter feed, let's see, just before, I think, this entry is new news of what the Russians are up to in all of this. I guess, who's this? Marshall Cohen is our tweeter here, a reporter at CNN who tweeted yesterday, this might be the most important news of the day. Of course, that day was yesterday, and today being today, I don't know that it's the most important news. But we didn't cover it yesterday, so we're behind. What is that news? Russia could leak Burisma emails. And, by the way, slip in some doctored emails to harm Biden later on, if he's the Democratic nominee, and even if he's not, quite honestly. And for a CNN reporter, a rather remarkable conclusion. This is the 2016 playbook all over again, linking to the work of the New York Times, entitled, Russians Hacked Ukrainian Gas Company at Center of Impeachment. Although it really is at the center of the counter charges that Republicans hope will save them from impeachment. The charges that Joe and Hunter Biden somehow illegally and improperly benefited from the largesse and corruption that they alleged to be at the center of Burisma's operations. Nicole Perlroth and Matthew Rosenberg teaming up on this item published yesterday, with President Trump facing an impeachment trial over his efforts to pressure Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and his son Hunter Biden. Some of this is a waste of time, clearly. Russian military hackers have been boring into the into the Ukrainian gas company at the center of the affair, according to security experts. I would remind you that there are several gas companies that are really at the center of this. Burisma has been important in all this, but just as important, I would say, are the Russian gas companies and other Ukrainian gas companies that work in the same market, plus other aspirants to the Ukrainian gas market, like the ones dreamed up by Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who are working overtime with their lawyer to become the good guys in all of this. I don't know how far I want to let that progress, but that's in the news too. The hacking attempts against Burisma, the Ukrainian gas company on whose board Hunter Biden served, began in early November, as talk of the Bidens, Ukraine, and impeachment was dominating the news in the United States. It is not yet clear what the hackers found, or precisely what they were searching for, but the experts say the timing and scale of the attacks suggest that the Russians could be searching for potentially embarrassing material on the Bidens, the same kind of information that Mr. Trump wanted from Ukraine when he pressed for an investigation of the Bidens and Burisma, setting off a chain of events that led to his impeachment. So, is this a case of Russia, are you listening to? That is, Russia, if you're listening, please find the secret emails being hidden by Burisma that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Hunter Biden is corrupt, and so is his father, Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe with the crazy eyes. I don't know, whatever dumb thing he would be pointing out at this juncture in this fake speech. But he couldn't get this dirt from anyone, possibly because it doesn't exist. And so, Russia, if you're listening, maybe you can find the dirt. Or, as is it Matthew? What name did we? Marshall Cohen, as he points out here, they could simply invent it. Russia, if you're listening, maybe you can find the emails. And maybe if the emails don't exist, you could type up emails, fake, and then put them in there and say, look what we found. And then we'd all believe it. Because if people said Russia forged those emails, oh, sure, Russia just forged them. Right, sure, big conspiracy theory. And we'll go back and forth, and the reporters will say both sides, and we'll never get to the bottom of it, and it'll be so wacky. The Russian tactics, it's pointed out here in the New York Times reporting, are strikingly similar to what American intelligence agencies say was Russia's hacking of emails from Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman and the Democratic National Committee during the 2016 presidential campaign. In that case, once they had the emails, the Russians used trolls to spread and spin the material and built an echo chamber to widen its effect. Then, as now, the Russian hackers from a military intelligence unit formerly known as the GRU, and to private researchers by the alias Fancy Bear, that's one we made up, used so-called phishing emails that appear designed to steal usernames and passwords, according to Area 1, the Silicon Valley security firm that detected the hacking. In this instance, the hackers set up fake websites that mimicked sign-on pages of Burisma subsidiaries and have been blasting Burisma employees with emails meant to look like they're coming from inside the company. The hackers fooled some of them into handing over their login credentials and managed to get inside one of Burisma's servers, Area 1 said. The attacks were successful, said Oren Falkowitz, the co-founder of Area 1, a co-founder, who previously served at the National Security Agency. Mr. Falkowitz's firm maintains a network of sensors on web servers around the globe, many known to be used by state-sponsored hackers, which gives the firm a front-row seat to phishing attacks and allows them to block attacks on their customers. The timing of the Russian campaign mirrors the GRU hacks we saw in 2016 against the DNC and John Podesta, the Clinton campaign chairman, Mr. Falkowitz said. Once again, they are stealing email credentials in what we can only assume is a repeat of Russian interference in the last election. The Justice Department indicted 7 officers from the same military intelligence unit in 2018. The Russian attacks on Burisma appear to be running parallel to an effort by Russian spies in Ukraine to dig up information in the analog world that could embarrass the Bidens, according to an American security official who spoke on condition of anonymity, of course. The spies, the official said, are trying to penetrate Burisma and working sources in the Ukrainian government in search of emails, financial records, and legal documents. In other words, Rudy Kaludi failed in the job. Lev Parnas couldn't wrest it free either, so the Russians have sent their own spies to try to do this work. Allegedly. The Russian government did not immediately respond to requests for comment, nor did Burisma. I don't think anybody would have guessed that they would respond to those requests. American officials are warning that the Russians have grown stealthier since 2016, but it doesn't appear so to me, but okay. And they are again seeking to steal and spread damaging information and target vulnerable election systems ahead of the 2020 election. In the same vein, Russia has been working since the early days of Trump's presidency to turn the focus away from its own election interference in 2016 by seeding conspiracy theories about Ukrainian meddling and Democratic complicity. The result has been a muddy brew of conspiracy theories that mix facts, like the handful of Ukrainians who openly criticized Mr. Trump's candidacy, with discredited claims that the DNC's email server is in Ukraine and that Mr. Biden, as vice president, had corrupt dealings with Ukrainian officials to protect his son. Spread by bots and trolls on social media and by Russian intelligence officers, the claims resonated with Mr. Trump, who's very dumb, that's my own editorializing, but who views talk of Russian interference as an attack on his legitimacy, which it is, because he hasn't got any, and the reason he purports to be president right now, even without that legitimacy, is because of the aid of the Russian interference. I sometimes have to add my own explanation to these stories, even for the New York Times. With Mr. Biden's emergence as a frontrunner for the Democratic nomination last spring, that's obviously the Times speaking here. I would never bother calling him Mr. Biden. The president latched on to the corruption allegations and asked that Ukraine investigate the Bidens on his July 25th call with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine. Ukraine, if you're listening, essentially is what was happening there. The call became central to Mr. Trump's impeachment last month. The Biden campaign sought to cast the Russian effort to hack Burisma as an indication of Biden's political strength. Why not? And to highlight Trump's apparent willingness to let foreign powers boost his political fortunes. Donald Trump tried to coerce Ukraine into lying about Joe Biden and a major bipartisan international anti-corruption victory because he recognized that he can't beat the vice president, said Andrew Bates, a spokesman for the Biden campaign. Now we know that Vladimir Putin also sees Joe Biden as a threat, Bates added. Any American president who had not repeatedly encouraged foreign interventions of this kind would immediately condemn this attack on the sovereignty of our elections. The corruption allegations hinge on Hunter Biden's work on the Burisma board. Do we need this? I don't think so. You know all about that. Of course, Biden was trying to get Ukraine's top prosecutor fired for his own corruption, not Joe Biden's, but rather the prosecutors. The effort was backed by European allies. The story has since been recast by Trump and some of his staunchest defenders who say Biden pushed the prosecutor out because Burisma was under investigation and his son could be implicated. Rudy Kaludi, acting in what he says was his capacity as Trump's personal lawyer, has personally taken up investigating the Bidens and Burisma and now regularly claims to have uncovered clear-cut evidence of wrongdoing, which would suggest that what the Russians are doing is unnecessary. But since Rudy Kaludi himself has never once revealed what any of that evidence is, I don't know whether he's hiding the ball and waiting for a better opportunity closer to the election or has nothing. But apparently the president thinks he has nothing because he's asked Russia, if they're listening, to double-check Rudy's work because he hasn't been able to come up with anything. The evidence, though, has yet to emerge, and now the Russians appear to have joined the hunt. Area 1 researchers discovered a GRU phishing campaign on Ukrainian companies on New Year's Eve. A week later, Area 1 determined what the Ukrainian targets had in common. They are all subsidiaries of Burisma Holdings, the company at the center of Trump's impeachment. Among the Burisma subsidiaries phished were KUB Gas, Aldea, A-L-D-E-A, Esco Pivinch, I don't have to spell everything for you, do I? Nadra Gas, that's a new gas company. I hadn't heard about that one. I've heard Naftogaz, but Nadra Gas is a new one. Technocom Service, and Pari, P-A-R-I. Spell that one because it's short. They're very clever in their naming. Oh, there. Technocom. All right, whatever. Oh, I'm sorry. It might be Technocom. Maybe it's, I can't tell if this is a typo, or maybe it's Tenocom. It's written here without the C. T-E-H-N-O. Not techno, but Teno. Tenocom, which at least, I guess if it is Tenocom, maybe that doesn't mean techno, and it's more clever of a name than I thought. The targets also included, oh boy, Kvartal 95, K-V-A-R-T-A-L, 95, a Ukrainian television production company, founded by Mr. Zelensky. The phishing attack on Kvartal 95 appears to have been aimed at digging up email correspondence for the company's chief, Ivan Bakanov, whom Mr. Zelensky appointed as the head of Ukraine's security service last June. They're really running it pretty thin over there. But I guess with the corruption problems that they have, you got to go with somebody close to you that you trust. But so he started a television production company because he was a big TV star, Zelensky was. And the chief of his television production company has been made the chief of Ukraine's security service. I don't know if that's a great idea, but it happened. Let's finish things up before we jump out for our 1-minute break at the top of the hour. To steal employees' credentials, the GRU hackers directed Burisma to their fake login pages. Does this need to be repeated? Area 1 was able to trace the lookalike sites through a combination of internet service providers frequently used by GRU hackers, rare web traffic patterns, and techniques that have been used in previous attacks against a slew of other victims, including the 2016 hack of the DNC and a more recent Russian hack of the World Anti-Doping Agency. Oh, remember that story? Yeah. Wow. Everything gets involved in this one. The Burisma hack is a cookie-cutter GRU campaign, Mr. Falkowitz said. Russian hackers, as sophisticated as they are, also tend to be lazy. They use what works, and in this, they were successful. Interesting. All right, well, that's where we now stand. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see where to move next. There are about 3 different directions that I think could easily, immediately follow what we just updated with. But perhaps I will jump off of that train just for a second to bring you something I think equally important that we haven't yet discussed on a slightly different subject. This one borrowed from the Washington Post's reporting, John Hudson, Missy Ryan, and Josh Dawsey over the weekend reporting. On the day U.S. forces killed Soleimani, they targeted a senior Iranian official in Yemen. And this likely sort of old news to many of you who may have read it over the weekend, but I think we need to sort of put it on record so that we can consider the broader context of the Trump administration's machinations, so they try to dig out from under the weekend's lies about the operation. On the day the U.S. military killed a top Iranian commander in Baghdad, U.S. forces carried out another top-secret mission against a senior Iranian military official in Yemen, according to U.S. officials. Like I said, you probably, many of you have read the news about it. What I want to point out here is how vague the information about this operation is. Some of it is disguised by the idea we're pretty used to of these things being kind of secretive, and so there's not a lot of information out there about them, but there's some active avoidance of discussing the sorts of details that would tell us something about what kind of attack this is. And the fact that they're dancing around it makes me wonder exactly what was going on here. All right, let's with that warning in mind, let's read. The strike targeting Abdul Reza Shalai, perhaps? Shahlai? Shalai? Abdul Reza Shalai, a financier and key commander in Iran's elite Quds Force, remember Quds Force again, who has been active in Yemen, did not result in his death, according to 4 U.S. officials familiar with the matter. So again, it's the strike, and it didn't succeed. And also, let's see, first we said he was a senior Iranian military official. Now we point out that he's also a financier and connected to the Quds Force, which is an interesting note for us at this point. Again, other countries operate differently. As we've mentioned in the past, things like, well, maybe it's not a great idea to draw direct parallels between the United States government and the way we operate and the Russian government, when we're saying, well, we keep blaming this on the Russians, but these are organized crime figures, and that's not the Russian government, except that in Russia, the line between organized crime and the government is kind of blurred, because, of course, the government is run by their chief organized crime figure. Although we tend to point that out as, well, that's Semyon Migolovich. Well, Vladimir Putin is himself an oligarch and the richest person in Russia. And the reason that this is the case, of course, is that all the corruption schemes kick up to him and he runs and approves them. By the way, I guess if you read enough history, that's not entirely unprecedented. It's kind of the way Europe ran in the feudal era for hundreds of years. But we're supposed to be beyond that now. We have this weird idea that here in the 20th and 21st centuries that everybody runs a professionalized government like the United States does. Well, the United States doesn't run like that anymore, of course, under the Trump administration. But it used to be the case anyway. But we also have a clear parallel we make. Very often on the show, we talk about Saudi Arabia being really, that's not really the same kind of country, the same kind of thing when we talk about countries as the United States is. This, too, is still openly a feudal type structure, although, it's Arabian in nature, so it's not a European feudal structure, but it's not that dissimilar from it, and we remind everybody every chance we get on Twitter and here on the show, it's Saudi Arabia. We say it as that's the name of the country, Saudi Arabia. But we forget it's that part of Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, that's owned by the Saud family. It's Saudi because it describes the state of that part of Arabia, belonging to the Saud family. And we should point that out as often as we can. We're not dealing with exactly the same kind of country. It's a large feudal family-owned compound that happens to encompass millions of however many square miles. I don't know. There's a lot of square miles in something as big as the Arabian Peninsula. But if you ever looked at the map, for instance, look at the map of the area and say, how did it happen that there's these little tiny corners of this peninsula cut off? Oman, Yemen, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, all of these little bits and pieces of the Arabian Peninsula. Why aren't they all part of Saudi Arabia? And the answer is because Saudi Arabia encompasses, that's all the parts of the Arabian Peninsula, the Saud family, the family forces. Think of it, I guess, as, it's not really a crime, but a gang force, warlordism. The Saud family fought bitterly against other rival families for control. They wanted to have the whole thing. Believe me, they wanted the whole Arabian Peninsula to be Saudi Arabia. But those little bits and pieces where we have other countries, Qatar, Kuwait, etc., are places where other local warlords were successful in holding off the forces of the Saud family and the family before it, the Rashid family. Had the war in the 1920s gone the other way, we discussed this once on the show, it would be Rashidi Arabia, not Saudi Arabia. There's nothing, that's not just the name of the country. It's not like the France family owns France. That's why we're getting confused about these things. But back in the, in the feudal days, of course, there were families that owned the whole area. But We moved beyond that, and then we're past it for several hundred years by the time this happens. I guess the only thing that's unusual about it is that they were still doing this in the 1920s, whereas we had pretty much finished up with that notion of governance in the, 1420s. Maybe I have the century wrong. But worth remembering. So to a lesser extent, somewhat less dissimilar to us, we have modern governance structure, but of course colored by Islamic law, for one thing, in Iraq, and just general political choices about the way they do their business. That a general in the armed forces might also be a financier seems odd for us because we have a professionalized military in which your job and only job, at least while you're in the military, is to be that general. Now, you might graduate from that and move on in retirement to a consulting firm or a defense contractor where you can reap millions of dollars and perhaps consider yourself a financier as well, but not at the same time as you're serving in the military. In Iran, they look at things differently, especially since he's the commander of part of the Quds force, which operates outside the country, which means that they need to operate and pay their people and pay for their materials in currencies other than the Iranian currency, which is under severe sanctions as it is anyway, and isn't as hard and well recognized around the world as other currencies. So if you're going to be a general in the Quds force, you're going to also have to be a financier. Part of your job is in conducting these operations outside of Iranian territory and inside the territory of other countries. You have to do it somewhat clandestinely, and that probably very often means paying in cash, and that means paying in cash that isn't Iranian, and that means finding ways to get a hold of that cash, and that means being either, if you look at it one way, a financier, or looked at another way, a money laundering gangster. For instance, if you find that the best way to get a hold of the hard currency you need to finance the operation of the Quds force is to go into business with somebody like Donald Trump, who would be willing to, for a fee, launder your money through his stupid Trump Tower in Baku, Azerbaijan, well, you take that chance. You got to launder your money somewhere. And structuring that deal, looked at through a certain lens with just the right kind of squint and tilt of the head, makes you a financier. Now, on to the, maybe third sentence of this piece in the Washington Post. You may have read it on your own, but it was never as interesting and diverting as it was here, being picked apart sentence by sentence on the radio. The unsuccessful operation. Remember that? That it was unsuccessful and we don't know what kind of operation it is? Ooh, I'm giving away the hint of what they're not telling you. The unsuccessful operation may indicate that the Trump administration's killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani last week was part of a broader operation than previously explained, raising questions about whether the mission was designed to cripple the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps or solely to prevent an imminent attack, and I guess we should put that in scare quotes, on Americans as originally stated. Although even the original statement has already been through 3 or 4 iterations by the time this got written. An attack on an embassy, an attack on 4 embassies, an attack on 5 million embassies? We don't know. Well, what we know is this. It was made up on the spot. U.S. military operations in Yemen, where a civil war... hang on just a second. No, I don't think I did. It should still be there.
Okay,
So you can take mine.
yours.
Okay. All right, side conversation. Did you find everything else, though?
Yep.
Okay, very good. The breaking news, everybody. I did not take the Easy Pass out of my wife's car. I should have, but I didn't. Did I mention what happened to the car? Never mind. That's news for another day. I'll waste Joan's time with that when the time comes. Sorry about that, but I did have to answer that question. All right. Where were we? Yes, we were assassinating Iranian generals who for taking easy passes, or perhaps for not taking easy passes out of our cars. Yes, So, U.S. military operations in Yemen, where a civil war has created the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and we have forgotten about that, are shrouded in secrecy. U.S. officials said the operation against Shalai remains highly classified, so we won't tell you anything about it. And many declined to offer details other than to say it failed. Officials at the Pentagon and at military commands in Florida were monitoring both strikes and had discussed announcing them together had they gone well, officials said. If we had killed him, we'd be bragging about it that same night. That's not really cool to say, but that's according to a senior U.S. official who, like others, spoke on condition of anonymity, so he can say something as dickish as that, I guess, and get away with it. Another senior official said that the two strikes were authorized around the same time, and that time now appears to be, according to other reporting, up to 7 months earlier than we originally heard, but authorized around the same time, and the United States did not disclose the Shalai mission because it did not go according to plan. The official said Shalai may be targeted in the future, though both countries have signaled an interest in de-escalating the crisis surrounding the killing of Soleimani. The rationale for the Trump administration's decision to kill Soleimani has come under scrutiny in Congress, with House lawmakers providing a resolution on Thursday to restrict the president's authority to strike Iran without congressional approval. Defense and State Department officials said the strike against Soleimani saved dozens, if not hundreds, of American lives under imminent threat. The strike against Shalai potentially complicates that argument. This suggests a mission with a longer planning horizon and a larger objective, and it really does call into question why there was an attempt to explain this publicly on the basis of an imminent threat, said Suzanne Maloney, an Iran scholar at the Brookings Institution. The Trump administration views Shalai, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, by the way, as a particularly potent adversary, or adversary if you prefer that pronunciation. A Pentagon spokeswoman, Commander Rebecca Rebarich, said the Defense Department does not discuss alleged operations in the Middle East. We have seen the report of a January 2nd airstrike in Yemen, which is long understood as a safe space for terrorists and other adversaries to the United States, she said in a statement. Now that is the first mention of an airstrike. That is how Soleimani was killed, and it was called an airstrike, or more specifically a drone strike in some of the reporting earlier. And I note for the record that up to this point, the Washington Post's own discussion of the strike against Shalai is reported to as only a strike and not designated an airstrike or any other particular kind of strike. And even here, though, it's the first mention of an airstrike, but it's as part of a denial and the sort of offhand comment from the commander here that airstrikes in Yemen are commonplace. We don't even know if we're talking about the same thing. I guess what struck me most about this, and now that we have Joan on, we can either switch topics or continue to discuss this, but hang on, Joan. I'll just wind this up. But it occurs to me that with this now indicating that there was a wider strategy of targeting perhaps the entire leadership of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, wherever they may be, not only was it bigger, larger, and earlier planned, but I found it weird that there was no discussion of how they had aimed to take out this other general. And it reminded me an awful lot of the fact that Vladimir Putin, who, bit of a role model for Donald Trump, it seems, has kind of unabashedly gone about the business of trying to assassinate enemies wherever they may be. And I was wondering if the deliberate imprecision in discussing how they had attempted to assassinate this Iranian general in Yemen might mean that it had been something as unconventional and out of the ordinary for American strikes, but in keeping with the nature of Russian strikes. What if this unsuccessful attempt on this general's life was a poisoning? Would that color the way we understood things Why would it be unsuccessful? It seems to me like these drone strikes blow up everything within a pretty decent amount of square footage and take out all sorts of things, including weddings in the past, which hasn't deterred us. I'm just curious how we were able to strike with such precision on a automobile caravan that killed Soleimani, but failed somehow in the middle of Yemen, where we wouldn't be worried about, probably wouldn't be worried about collateral damage at all. Somehow simply didn't succeed. And it's since we still don't know whether it was a drone strike or an airstrike of any kind, I wonder if it was something less conventional, and the president might be interested in imitating Putin's methodologies. And since it didn't succeed in killing him, they're embarrassed on that front, but even more so to say, yeah, we stuck the wrong guy with a poison umbrella tip or whatever it was we were trying to do. Pure speculation on my part, but at this point, put nothing past the Trump administration. They're cheating at every level possible. And something as stupid as imitating a poison attack to be more like Putin is well within the range of possibility for somebody as dumb as Trump. Now, possibly turning the page or possibly opening this up for more comment, Joan McCarter joins us on a Tuesday, a rare event that we hope to make a regular feature. Good morning, Joan.
Good morning. Happy Tuesday.
Thank you. I hope I haven't stunned you into silence here. You're just being polite here.
It's a complicated Tuesday with illnesses and vacations and, the usual.
Yes, well, it's flu season, but everybody's been vaccinated, surely, because, one, we're not anti-vax, and two, Greg told you to do it, and three, you're sensible people, so what can you
Everybody is vaccinated? That
we hope so.
Particularly for the people with children in daycare.
Yes.
That's not always enough.
Right, yeah. Right. You can't avoid everything. And even the flu vaccine won't necessarily keep you from getting the flu. So, anyway, we don't know if that's what it is. But it's not our business. And HIPAA prevents us from digging any further into it. Although it has not prevented us from revealing the president's mental illness publicly. Too bad about that. I was wondering about that. They should be. I think they should charge Fox with a HIPAA violation for airing that interview with Laura Ingraham. That should have been kept under wraps, quite honestly.
That should have been kept under wraps. Had Fox News really been looking out for him, they would not have let that happen.
Right. And, they're not. So.
But he's the president. He can say or do whatever. But did you see? Yesterday he just decided, okay, I'm done with all of this rationale. I don't have to prove that this was a legitimate strike against Soleimani. It doesn't matter. He literally said it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think I had even gotten around to that part, but that made a big splash yesterday. Okay, maybe it wasn't imminent, but so what? What if it wasn't imminent? Doesn't matter.
I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
He was a bad guy.
Yes. And we all thought he was speaking hyperbolically many people thought he was speaking hyperbolically when he said it. I can do whatever. I have an absolute right to do whatever I want as president. I have no doubt that he fully believes that that's not any kind of hyperbole from him. He believes that that's always been the case among presidents. And that was why he wanted to be president in the first place. For anybody still looking for a rationale for giving up his life of apparent luxury, the one thing that would do it is an honest belief that meant you could do anything you wanted. Ever, anywhere.
I know he believes that. And, he finally has an attorney general who's telling him that's true.
Right. I mean, literally down to anything you wanted. If your fantasies of whatever you would do with unlimited power run in different directions, you have less ambition to be a world player, but would rather say, I would wish that I could eat whatever I wanted and not gain any weight. Well, one way you could do that, of course, is to say, I order you as my doctor to say that I haven't. And then magically...
And it works if you're president. You can do anything. Or
that is right. I mean, literally anything. That actually happened. And I'm not kidding. So, I can't say it any plainer than he finger paints his face orange and misses a final quarter of his skin. and gets away with it. So I don't know what to tell you. There's nothing
He
crazy
has
than
to
that.
be doing it himself. If
Yeah.
he had assistance, he wouldn't have that bright white
Yeah.
line.
You wouldn't stop a half an inch from your hairline.
No.
I don't understand. I just think that I think is his failing eyesight as well. He just doesn't have the peripheral vision to see that he hasn't done it, like
I think
cobwebs in the
that's
corner.
true, and he refuses to wear glasses. So
Yeah. Although I did wonder whether maybe he was originally I thought he might be putting on his makeup with his glasses on, and that's why he didn't get around his eyes. But then he wouldn't miss this stuff, and his glasses also are huge and rectangular of sorts, and I don't know, there would be more unmade up. I'm not sure what's happening. I'd love to know, but that's lower on the list of things we really need to know about what he does.
That really matter when it comes to Trump, unless these things could be poisoning him.
That's true. Boy, would that be a shame.
Who knows what's in whatever makeup he buys?
Right.
I'm sure he gets it.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, enough.
Russia,
enough.
if you're listening,
enough of him.
we'll say stop poisoning his makeup. Yeah, see, now we're not in trouble. See.
All right, poison.
Okay.
Is Trump subtly enough minded to think he wants to emulate Putin on those trickier assassinations, or does he just want to blow stuff up? I think he just wants to blow stuff up.
That could be. We got nothing to go either way. I'm strangely suspicious of the fact that we've done all of our targeting in the Middle East this way, and this Washington Post piece is super cagey about even mentioning how the attempt was made on this other general's life. And they don't even make the assumption that is like they've been warned off making the assumption that it was an airstrike or a drone strike. And that's weird to me. So it seems to me like it might have been something else. Could be as simple and straightforward as stepping out from a dark alley and shooting him, which is also bad. But I'm very curious about why this isn't, unless, operationally they don't want to admit that drones can miss, but we've seen them miss. I don't know what they're protecting here. So it's weird and tips me off that something odd is going to, come out about it. Whether it's poison, I wouldn't bet a whole lot on it. But he really does have a strange admiration for Putin and the way he operates, and may want to show that he's even sneakier than that. I don't know. He's not, but, he'd be giving something, do something fancy. Something really like out of a spy movie. So I don't know.
I don't know.
Strikes me as odd. Anyway, other items, of course, up for discussion. You don't have to weigh in on my crazy conspiracy theory if you don't want to.
And we do have limited time.
Yes.
So the key things, the top of the list things, the House is voting tomorrow. Nancy Pelosi has announced in a Democratic caucus meeting this morning that they will vote tomorrow to send impeachment articles to Trump.
Okay.
And she also tweeted out, I don't know if you saw it, a chart comparing the Clinton impeachment to the Trump cover-up, as she's calling it.
Mm-hmm. I didn't see the chart, but let's discuss it.
I will retweet it for you.
I will monitor that retweeting.
Because this is something that Republicans keep pointing at, saying, hypocritical Democrats. This is how we did it with Clinton. We did, we had this agreement. We didn't have the witnesses. The thing is, the Clinton administration blocked no witnesses from testifying to the House prosecutors.
Yes.
They didn't block any subpoenas. They didn't stop documents from going. They cooperated fully, and they did not collude with Democratic leadership. They walled off meetings on impeachment between White House staff and congressional leadership.
To no historical avail, of course, but at least
Yeah.
it gives us the opportunity to point up the differences. And yeah, that's an interesting chart for it. Of course, we have our break eating right into our limited amount of time. I hope this doesn't mean you have to run off right away. But yeah, this is thank you for retweeting it. I did pick it up. That's a huge difference. Yeah, so today's announcement is the vote is tomorrow. Is that what you told me?
Yes.
Okay.
Probably. Likely.
Okay. Well, likely to be true. We'll be back in 2 minutes to tell you what that may mean. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with a harried and unfortunately rushed Joan McCarter, busy taking care of the front page and giving you all the news, but you can get it here a few seconds earlier by listening to her describe it to you before pushing the publish button over at Daily Kos. We were left off with the chart that Speaker Pelosi has shared about the differences between the Clinton impeachment and the Trump cover-up. The caucus meeting today, probably right now, trying to decide exactly how to proceed from out of this. Likely votes tomorrow on appointing managers and sending the impeachment counts over to the Senate. A lot of speculation about whether or not Justin Amash would be included among the managers, and no indication of any serious interest or rejection of it, for that matter, from the Democratic leadership. But they tend not to vote to give enormous power to people who used to be Republicans.
No.
So,
Although it would be sort of fun to see Justin Amash and Mike Lee hashing this one out.
Yes, there are lots of advantages to it, but yeah, I definitely have mixed feelings about, do you trust the person, or not even so much that as does that kind of coveted position go to somebody who's, been a loyal and supportive Democrat all this time, as opposed to someone who's coincidentally in agreement with you for the moment.
Yes. I think the main thing, we get Adam Schiff. Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned, that's the most important thing. Yeah. That Adam Schiff is one of them.
Okay, makes a lot of sense and seems pretty likely. And there's no limit on the number we can send either.
No.
So
no.
I guess you could throw
there's
Amos in there if you
that
wanted
speculation.
to.
We don't know. What we do know is once it gets over to the Senate, Mitch McConnell is likely going to do everything he can. Likely has already done everything he can to prevent there being witnesses.
Yeah, he said he wanted to do that. He usually does what he wants.
Yeah.
He's rarely deterred. So far we've heard, I think the report this morning was one Republican maybe thinking about voting in favor of witnesses, which would not get the job done.
It's Lisa Murkowski saying, well, yeah, I'm curious as to what John Bolton would say. But, she says, I'm willing to wait until we get through phase 1 and phase 2 of this, the presentation of the articles and the case made by the prosecutors, before I decide that we need to hear from witnesses. Okay. The chances of her deciding after that she's going to want to hear witnesses, I think is probably minimal.
Yeah, maybe. Unless it's, I guess, again, it's possible, certainly. So long as there's less than 4 of you, if anyone wants to entertain the idea or thinks it will help with their election, go ahead.
Susan Collins.
Yeah.
Supposedly Susan Collins is talking to, and a named number of Republicans, a small group, probably 2.
That's the minimum to constitute a group, I guess.
I think probably.
She may be lying about it being a group. With me, it's a group. That's one other person. An imaginary group. Yeah, I mean, it's all possible. And they have even if they did decide they were going to have witnesses, there's also a very weird formulation going on. In addition to turning the Senate into an appeals court as opposed to a trial court, Republican theory apparently is, well, if Democrats get to call a witness or 5 witnesses, let's say, then Republicans get to call an equal number of witnesses. That's only fair, which, if you're not
Which
thinking
I think
about what
Democrats
this is,
would be absolutely fine with.
They might be.
If they get to hear from Mulvaney and Bolton.
That's true. They might make that deal, which would obscure the fact that that's not how trials work. What are you talking about? Equal number. It's not. We're not sharing candy here. It's if you have a relevant witness with something to say that passes evidentiary muster, then they get to testify, and you can't ask them about stuff that doesn't matter. That gets objected to and struck from the record, and it's not. You don't split the number evenly, but that's the sort of thing that it appeals inherently to people who aren't spending any time thinking about what's going on here exactly.
Yes.
So, that seems odd, but in keeping with the way they're doing their work, just to obfuscate and blur what's happening. So, all right, we may see this as soon as next week.
As soon as next week, possibly. Complicating, of course, for Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Amy Klobuchar, the Iowa caucuses.
True.
We'll see.
But
not hugely. They're February 3rd?
I think, early February, which is...
So...
It should give you some time. And, Iowans understand how presidential elections work. We hope. I mean,
yes, they do. They've been through enough of them, and goodness, isn't it time that end?
Yes. Here's another
that Iowa
reason.
Gets to go first.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you were impeaching a president at this point, somebody would be missing out, some state. But I think the Iowans have had about enough of these guys anyway, and they've seen them everywhere. Please get out of our diners. Right. Maybe the biggest gift to Iowa
ever. I have to deal with that, but I think that they're very flattered.
Yes, they certainly appreciate it, but I believe they've had...
I mean, it's not like it's a tourist hotbed.
True. Right. So it's good money.
I wonder how much the state makes off of it. Huh.
Enough that they keep having this happen. Nobody wants
They're not kicking anybody out.
Right. So I imagine they'll have plenty of surrogates. The surrogates will go to the diners, and that'll be how it works instead. So they'll have to sit there, and then of course news stations will want to know what happened and want their view of what happened during the impeachment trial all day long. And if there are people running for president, it sounds like they have automatic airtime every night to say what they want about these things. So it's not the worst thing in the world.
Only people in Iowa get to see it.
Yeah. All right. One other.
So let's see. That's that. Nothing else happening in the Senate because nothing else is going to happen in the Senate besides pushing through more nominees.
Mm-hmm. Right. So impeach every day, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Keep going on that one if it can prevent nominees from getting through.
Yeah.
Schumer says he's going to do everything in his power to force votes constantly on having witnesses, on subpoenaing documents, which is all he can do, and it's smart.
Yes.
It will put pressure on Susan Collins and Cory Gardner, although I don't think I think Cory Gardner's resigned to his fate. I think he's decided he's going to lose, so he's just going to stick with Trump.
Well, I'm in agreement. He should lose.
Yes. But, there's still Joni Ernst. There's still Martha McSally. There's definitely Tom Tillis and Susan Collins.
Yes.
So, Absolutely. By all means, Schumer, put as much pressure on them as you possibly can.
Yes, we often have different ideas about how often you possibly can do these things. And he tends to be a bit more conservative than I am.
He does, but I've
those.
seen more zeal from him and less conservative thinking
Well, great.
than we've seen from him in the past. So he could be getting kind of riled up about this one.
Okay. Well, good. I hope so. And he'll be thinking along those lines, but also be thinking, well, how much is too much, and that might be a wise thing to watch out for. For instance, even among the members of the ship of the Senate, disrupting things with creating every opportunity to disrupt things is viewed differently by Schumer than it is, say, by Rand Paul. Or even Bernie Sanders, for that matter.
Who lives to do that.
Right. Or Ted Cruz, right, who, will object that, somebody's shoelaces are untied and therefore we can't go forward.
So that's where we're at in the Senate. It's where we're at in the House. There isn't a whole lot else unless you want to get into primary fighting, which I would really rather not do.
No, not a preferred topic of mine. And nothing that needs to be enabled at this point. There's nothing we can do. There's no stopping it. So,
yeah.
All right. Those things are happening. We acknowledge them. We've seen them. That's it for me. It just sounds like it's enough for you, too.
It is. It is.
Okay.
We've got stuff to deal with, like a president who doesn't think that he has to provide justification for assassinating foreign officials.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And now, let's see. What other?
And who is busily hacking away at the safety net. This is something coming up. There are two things coming up. The implementation of the new rules on food stamps and getting basically eliminating the ability for states to waive restrictions that impose work requirements on folks getting food assistance. But another one that's coming up that's not gotten as much attention, they snuck it out in the week before Christmas, so a lot of people haven't paid attention yet, is changing how they review Social Security disability insurance cases and adding a new tier for the older Americans who should still be in the workforce but aren't because they're older Americans and they're being discriminated against and it's harder to do their jobs physically, by requiring that they provide more documentation that they are still disabled and unemployable. So adding additional hoops and additional review of their cases to try to kick them off.
Sounds Trumpian.
It's very Trumpian, and it's coming, much to the chagrin of lots of older people who really can't do their jobs anymore and who don't have very much available in the way of work for them. Yeah. So that's one I'm going to be writing about more coming up, and I'll provide links for how folks can comment to the federal government. Not that it's going to make any difference with Trump. There's no indication, studies have been done on this, there's no indication at all that this actually will increase employment. Just like there's no indication that work requirements on Medicaid or food stamps will actually increase employment. It just increases suffering.
Yes.
But that's the point with the Trump administration.
True.
The cruelty is the point.
And no more succinct way of saying it than that. So par for the course there, and also par for the course with their strange anti-fraud, waste and abuse crusading that never works out, like drug testing.
And ends up actually costing a lot more money to implement than you are saving.
Yes.
And curbing waste, fraud, and abuse. So.
Right. Plus, the last person famously arrested for Social Security fraud is a huge MAGA Trump fan.
Stealing her mother's Social
Yeah.
Security checks.
Right. Awesome. That's where the fraud is, and you'll usually find it there among people who
Yeah.
are used to stealing checks from other people. I mean,
Kind of like voter fraud.
yeah. Right.
It's
Exactly.
always a Republican proving the voter fraud exists.
Yeah. And I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they're motivated. Sometimes they're even just trying to show that it could really happen, and then they get arrested doing it. So it was a sting operation. Yeah. Well, you still did it. And you're not a cop. So that doesn't work like that. Yeah, but that's another amazing example of I guess of projection too. That even that story continues. Everything that they accuse everybody of is something that they think everybody does it because they're doing it, and that's it.
There are some real psychoses happening in that party.
Yeah.
So I guess Trump makes a perfect figurehead for them.
Right.
He's got all of them wrapped up in one.
Mm-hmm. And we're constantly reminded that he's a symptom rather than the cause.
Yes.
Okay.
And on that note, I'm afraid I have to leave you.
I am also afraid, but I'll be brave and let you do it. Thank you for coming by at all, given the rush of stories that you'll have to cover in the absence of vacationers and other team members who are ill. But thank you for picking up the slack for them. I'm sure they appreciate it. We all do.
Oh, and it's debate night.
Oh, yes, right. Well,
we're not actually doing the regular live blogging, but we're going to have open threads, and we'll be adding comments and give a place for everybody to talk about it. So
yeah,
that, as always,
be
happening
fine
on the front page of Daily Coast tonight.
Yeah, well, with the particular lineup of people who are out, you'd really have a hard time doing the usual live blogging things. Mark on vacation. Others ill. All right. So you've all heard it all before. But it's a place to talk about it, talk it over, and chew over the controversies that are raised tonight, including the absence of so many of the earlier declared candidates. It's going to be
it's going to be a very, very white stage we see tonight, and that's not a good thing.
No. Well, all right. We still have to hammer out this process. We got work to do and ways to keep our primaries open and interesting and active for everybody. Next time, here on the Democratic Party. A continuing saga. Right, thanks very much, Joan. Take care.
You're most welcome.
Good luck
we'll talk to you
dealing with
next
the flood today. Okay. I hope on Tuesday.
Hopefully on Tuesday.
Excellent. Take care, and we'll see you again soon. All right, let's see. Other interesting stories that we might be able to squeeze in before closing things out. Let's see. I mentioned that there were some other connected stories besides the speculation about whether or not we were assassinating people by means other than drone. This one, let's see. There's a couple of interesting articles. Let me go over to this one and see where this goes. This is Paul Waldman musing in the plumb line. New Iran revelations suggest Trump's deceptions were deeper than we thought. Seems, I guess, this is a corollary to the article we were just reading about the other strike going on. Believe it or not, the Trump administration may not have been completely honest about its policy toward Iran and its rationale for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Not that officials have offered a single explanation for why the assassination was carried out, or rather a single. They've offered several. I mean to say, not that they've offered a unified explanation. Their story has changed numerous times, but the justification they keep returning to is that intelligence indicated an imminent threat, and Soleimani was planning specific attacks against American interests and personnel, attacks that were so imminent that he had to be killed to stop them. And of course, interestingly, now that has expanded to several different embassies, and we found out that the authorization was given months ago, we might wonder, although we know what the answer is, whether or not any of the embassies were warned about the possibility of attack in order to, spare the lives, perhaps, of people who work in those embassies on our behalf. And the answer is no. So that seems kind of weird. Like maybe it's not true that there was long-standing threats to multiple embassies or even imminent ones. But anyway, Paul continues. Now we learn that much more appears to have been going on. That's one key takeaway from this blockbuster scoop in the Post, which was, of course, the possibility that they were targeting another of the leaders of the Quds forces in Yemen. The attempt to take out Shalai, as we were pronouncing it, simultaneously with Soleimani suggests that this wasn't an isolated defensive operation, but may have been part of a broader attack on the Quds force. Shalai operating in Yemen, of course, meaning the conflict he's waging at the moment is less against the United States than against who? The Saud family, who own Saud-owned Arabia, which is engaged in a war with Yemen against Iran-backed rebels with our support. In fact, our money. In fact, the $1 billion that it is alleged, or it was alleged to Laura Ingraham the other day by the idiot president, that had been deposited in a bank account, an unknown bank account about which we know nothing, and for which there are no receipts apparently, was to pay for the deployment of additional American troops to guard the royal palaces and presumably oil fields that the Sauds owned in their part of Arabia. And, of course, that turns them directly into mercenaries, and it's bad. If it's even true that any money changed hands, I mean, that could be a lie from the ground up. And, of course, if it isn't a lie that $1 billion changed hands, we're going to want to know, what do you mean in the bank? What bank? The Treasury? Your bank? Deutsche Bank? Different bank? Where is the SoftBank? The thing that Jared Kushner is involved with? I don't know. Where's the money gone? And of course, the likelihood that there was any money changing hands is probably near zero, because we also found out that we've been footing the bill for refueling Saud family fighter jets. This is a real serious gang we have here, by the way. I mean, essentially, what's the difference? I guess a flag and much more money is the difference between, say, MS-13 and the Saud family. They're both gangs. They're self-preservation-oriented street gangs. It's just that the streets in many parts of Saudi Arabia are perhaps in better repair than the ones that MS-13 or any other gang, if you care to name one, might be occupying. Anyway, they also have fighter jets, which MS-13 does not have. And we've been refueling them so that they can bomb Yemen and billing them for the services properly. I mean, we're selling them not only jet fuel, but operating our own planes to refuel them. It's an awfully expensive thing to do. And they've run up quite a tab for it, and they have not paid that. And if the allegation is that they have paid $1 billion for troops to be stationed to guard their royal palaces, I'd be interested in knowing. We'd all be interested in knowing whether that's true and where the money went and what the terms of the deal are and whether that means anything in terms of them actually repaying their existing debt to us for refueling costs. Anyway, so this has raised issues in Congress and among Democrats there. Paul notes here that Eliot Engel, who's the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, says there's no doubt in his mind that the assassination of Soleimani and the effort to target Shalai are part of a wider effort that's mostly being concealed from Congress. It's a war powers issue, everybody. The more you hear, the more you realize you've been fed a bunch of untruths, Engel told us, at the plumb line. Was Shalai an imminent threat? I think not. Congressman Tom Malinowski, Democrat of New Jersey and a member of the committee, added that this news badly complicates the rationale for the Soleimani killing. This does make it harder for the administration to argue that the operations were solely designed to eliminate somebody who was plotting attacks on Americans, because the other guy was plotting attacks on Saudis, I guess. But maybe they view them as largely the same thing. I won't run through the entirety of the article, but having tipped you off to its existence, if you haven't read it, you might find it enlightening. We'll move from this point on to one or two other items that I wanted to get in. We'll stay more or less on topic with this speculation in Politico from Suzanne Maloney, a Brookings foreign policy person and a former State Department official, who warns this: the lull in hostilities between Iran and the U.S. is just escalation in disguise, a worrisome prospect. In the latest volley of violence between Iran and the United States, the world averted a disaster, I guess temporarily anyway. Tehran's response to last week's U.S. drone strike that killed infamous Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani managed to pause the cycle of escalation by providing both sides exactly what they needed for the moment. Wednesday's Iranian missile barrage at U.S. military forces in Iraq enabled Tehran to punctuate its three-day epic commemoration of Soleimani with a spectacular show of strength, and the fortuitous, if deliberate, lack of casualties offered President Donald Trump a welcome opportunity to exult in a perceived foreign policy win just as the 2020 election season gets underway. By the way, did see some speculation out there about, hey, what happened to our fantastic Patriot missile systems that ordinarily we would have, I think, been relying on to defend the air base in Iraq? Why didn't they intercept any of these incoming Iranian missiles? And then some speculation that the batteries had been removed for some reason, and we don't know why. Maybe it was a sophisticated plot. Maybe not. Maybe they were never there. I don't know. Continuing on with this piece, though, the sense that Washington and Tehran had stepped back from the brink prompted audible sighs of relief, and a British royal drama replaced World War III as the top trending news story on social media. Unfortunately, while the world's war jitters have indeed subsided, the crisis itself is nowhere near over. This week's reprisals from Iran were not the end of the confrontation between Tehran and the Trump administration, but rather the beginning of a new, more dangerous and unpredictable phase of the long-running U.S.-Iranian hostilities. Indeed, on Friday, U.S. officials announced a new round of punitive economic sanctions, specifically targeting 8 individuals believed to have had a role in the Iranian missile strikes. These measures, along with new restrictions on Iran's metals and textile industries, are unlikely to have significant economic impact, but for Tehran, the new U.S. economic pressure will only be seen as a further confirmation of Trump's aggressive and uncompromising approach to Iran. The current lull after the initial exchange of fire isn't surprising. Both sides appreciate the need to slow or reverse the rapid cycle of escalation unleashed by Soleimani's killing. Iranian leaders have had a front row seat for the demonstration of U.S. conventional military superiority in Iraq and elsewhere across the region, and they are sufficiently prudent to steer clear of making themselves the next target. That prudence was clear in Wednesday's ballistic missile attack on Iraqi military bases at Ain al-Assad and Erbil. The rapidity, scope, and apparent precision of the Iranian response highlights the muscular principles of the Islamic Republic's security doctrine, which holds that the regime's survival depends on its strength and its readiness to go on the offensive. The imagery of Iranian firepower surely satisfied a domestic audience primed for vengeance after a massive nationwide funeral processions. However, Tehran's prior warning to Iraqi counterparts seemed designed to minimize or avoid American casualties, as Brigadier General Amir Ali Hajidazeh asserted on Thursday. I'm sure I've mangled that name. But in this sense, the early Iranian response was consistent with the theocratic state's calibrated, incremental escalation against U.S. interests and partners in Iraq and around the Persian Gulf over the past 6 months, when Washington ratcheted up economic pressure on Iran to unprecedented levels. In a series of mostly small-scale, precise attacks that culminated in September with a more consequential strike on Saudi oil infrastructure, Saudi, yes, Tehran sought to raise the costs to Washington and the world without placing itself in the crosshairs of American firepower. The recent skirmishing gave Iran's savvy strategists an accurate read on Trump's aversion to further entanglement and their calculation that a limited strike with no fatalities would avoid U.S. reprisals proved correct. However, the speculation in the balance of the article, to which we will not be able to get, is of course hinted at in the headline. I remind you, the lull in hostilities between Iran and the U.S. is just escalation in disguise, and it will be up to us to figure out what that disguise is. Perhaps we'll get to more of that during the balance of the week, and perhaps not, because we may very well be distracted by any number of additional stories, and possibly the inexorable movement toward the eventual beginning of the impeachment trial, not appeal, but trial in the Senate. For now, stay tuned as Justice Putnam takes you on a tour around domestic and international politics and catches you up on all the things that we laid to the side for today's
From
story.
Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
Lots more happening that we didn't cover, including the Trump administration making it harder for employees to sue corporations over franchise wage law violations. And, of course, let's see, much more from Elliot Engel. He's disappointed and frustrated that Mike Pompeo refuses to testify before his committee. Stay tuned.